Daniel Harrington wiped the sweat from his brow as he stepped out of Westview General Hospital. 16 hours on his feet in the ETR had left him bone-tired, but the exhaustion felt honest. 3 years since leaving the Rangers, and he'd finally found a rhythm as a trauma nurse. The discipline, the pressure, the lives, and the balance. It all made sense to him in a way civilian life rarely did. The August heat shimmered off the pavement as Daniel climbed into his pickup. He checked his phone. No messages from Hannah. Not unusual these days. 5 years of marriage, and the last 6 months had been increasingly silent. He chalked it up to her new job at the marketing firm. The late meetings, the weekend team-building events, the constant texts she'd hide when he entered the room. Just work stress, she'd said. And he believed her, or pretended to. Daniel drove past the Thai place where they'd had their first date, automatically slowing before deciding against bringing home takeout. Again. The last 3 times, the food had sat untouched in the refrigerator until he'd thrown it away. The ranch-style house they'd purchased 2 years ago came into view. Daniel frowned. An unfamiliar black Audi was parked in his usual spot. Hannah didn't mention having company over. As he pulled into the driveway, movement caught his eye. Large black garbage bags were scattered across the front lawn. A tall, muscular man with a sleeve tattoo was tossing another bag onto the pile. Beside him stood Hannah, her blonde hair pulled back, gesturing animatedly. Daniel stepped out of his truck, confusion giving way to a cold clarity as he approached. Hannah's laugh cut off abruptly when she noticed him. "You're home early," she said, crossing her arms. 16 hours is early, Daniel replied, eyeing the garbage bags. Something about their shape, the way they bulged. "What's going on?" The tattooed man smirked. There was something familiar about him, like Daniel had seen his face somewhere before. "Daniel," Hannah said, "you remember Nick, right? From college." And then it clicked. Nick Fletcher, Hannah's ex-boyfriend from before they'd met. The one she described as the one that got away during a drunken confession 3 years ago. "What's in the bags?" Daniel asked, though he already knew. Hannah's smile was brittle. "We needed your closet for Nick's things." Daniel stared at her, waiting for the punchline to what must be a cruel joke. "How long is he staying?" he finally asked. They both laughed, Nick draping his arm around Hannah's shoulders. "Permanently, of course," Nick answered, as if Daniel was slow on the uptake. Daniel stood perfectly still, the way he'd been trained to do under fire. In BlackRock, he had learned that movement draws attention, and attention gets you killed. His mind worked quickly, assessing, calculating. "I see," was all he said. Hannah's smile faltered. She'd expected tears, shouting, maybe even a fight. The calm on Daniel's face unsettled her. "Your stuff's all there." She gestured to the bags. "I packed everything." "That was considerate," Daniel replied. He turned back to his truck, opened the passenger door, and removed a small go bag he always kept there, another habit from his military days. Without another word, he began loading the garbage bags into the bed of his pickup. Nick and Hannah exchanged glances, confused by his lack of reaction. "That's it," Hannah called. "You're just leaving." Daniel secured the last bag and closed the truck bed. "Yes," he said simply. As he climbed into the driver's seat, he caught Nick's reflection in the side mirror. The man was whispering something in Hannah's ear, both of them snickering. Daniel drove away quietly. By nightfall, he'd checked into a motel on the outskirts of town, his few possessions stacked neatly in the corner of the room. He sat on the edge of the bed, still in his scrubs, and made a single phone call. "Ryan," he said when the line connected. "It's Dan. I need a favor." The storage unit was exactly as Daniel remembered it, tucked away in an industrial district with minimal security cameras and an owner who accepted cash without questions. 3 years ago, when he'd left the Rangers, his commanding officer had warned him, "The civilian world isn't built for men like us, Harrington. Keep an exit strategy." So he had. Ryan Maxwell leaned against his Jeep, smoking, as Daniel unlocked the padlock. The two men had served in the same unit for 6 years, surviving 3 deployments together. While Daniel had chosen nursing, hoping to heal instead of harm, Ryan had leveraged his military skills into a private security business. "Didn't think you'd ever use this place," Ryan commented as the metal door rolled up with a groan. The unit contained a metal footlocker, a filing cabinet, and several waterproof containers. Daniel flicked on a flashlight and stepped inside. "Neither did I." "You going to tell me what happened?" Daniel opened the footlocker. Inside lay specialized equipment and various identity documents. 3 different driver's licenses, passports, credit cards. He'd set everything up when he'd still been haunted by nightmares, unsure if he could adapt to civilian life, afraid of himself. "Hannah's moved her ex-boyfriend into our house," Daniel said, his voice clinical. "Threw my things on the lawn." Ryan whistled low. "Brother, that's cold. What do you need?" "I've got a spare room." "Information first." Daniel pulled out a laptop, booted it up. "I need to know everything about Nick Fletcher." Over the next 3 days, Daniel became a ghost. He didn't show up for his shifts at the hospital. He didn't answer Hannah's increasingly frantic texts. First angry accusations, then confused questions, and finally worried pleas to let her know he was alive. He and Ryan worked methodically, building a comprehensive profile of Nick Fletcher. 34 years old, former semi-professional boxer who'd never quite made it big, multiple assault charges that had mysteriously disappeared, currently working as a consultant for a local businessman with suspected ties to money laundering. "He's bad news," Ryan concluded, scrolling through financial records. "How'd your wife even reconnect with this guy?" Daniel stared at a surveillance photo of Nick leaving an underground casino. "That's what I'd like to know." The answer came on day 4. Hannah's social media revealed she'd started a new marketing campaign for a chain of gyms. The owner? Ivan Volkov, the same businessman Nick worked for. "It's not a coincidence," Daniel said, connecting the dots. Nick used his connection to Volkov to get Hannah the contract. That's how they reconnected. What intrigued Daniel more was what he found in Volkov's background. A Russian emigre, suspected ties to organized crime, and a reputation for eliminating problems permanently. "Your wife might be in danger," Ryan pointed out. "If this Nick guy is using her to access your house for something related to Volkov's operation." Daniel closed the laptop. "It's not my house anymore." Ryan studied his friend's face. "What are you planning, Dan?" "I'm not sure yet," Daniel replied. "But I think it's time I paid Nick a visit." Daniel observed the house, his house, for 2 days. From a vacant property across the street, he tracked the comings and goings, noting patterns. Hannah left for work at 8:15 a.m., returning around 6:30 p.m. Nick kept irregular hours, sometimes disappearing for entire nights. On the 3rd morning of surveillance, Daniel noticed something odd. A delivery truck arrived. 2 men carried in several heavy crates. Nick supervised, signing for the delivery, then made 3 phone calls in rapid succession. Through a directional microphone, Daniel caught fragments. "Secured the location. Wife doesn't suspect. Timeline moved up. 3 days max." That night, when Nick left the house at 11 p.m., Daniel followed. The man drove to an industrial warehouse where he met with Volkov and 3 other men. They spent 2 hours inside, then dispersed. But instead of returning home, Nick drove to a strip club on the edge of town. Daniel waited in the parking lot. At 3 a.m., Nick emerged, clearly intoxicated, with a woman on each arm. He dismissed them when they asked for payment, shoving one hard enough that she stumbled. As they cursed at him, Nick staggered to his car. "Perfect timing. Need a ride?" Daniel asked, stepping out of the shadows. Nick squinted, recognition slowly dawning. "You're the husband," he slurred. "The nurse boy." "Pararescue specialist, actually," Daniel corrected. 12 years in the Rangers before nursing. Nick snorted. "Whatever. The heck you want to talk about? Daniel nodded to a 24-hour diner across the street. Coffee might help sober you up. Curiosity overcame caution, aided by alcohol. Nick followed Daniel to the diner, where they took a booth in the back. The overnight waitress brought 2 coffees and retreated, sensing the tension. I found my clothes in garbage bags on the lawn after working a double shift, Daniel said conversationally. My wife texted me. We needed your closet for my ex-boyfriend's things. When I asked how long he was staying, you both laughed. Permanently, of course. Nick smirked. You should have seen your face, man. I left quietly, Daniel continued. But I've been watching. And I know Volkov has you storing something in my house. Something that's moving in 3 days. The smirk vanished. Nick's eyes narrowed. You don't know what you're talking about. Weapons, drugs, whatever it is, Hannah's fingerprints are all over it now. When the feds come knocking, and they will, she goes down with you. There won't be any feds, Nick growled. Daniel leaned forward, unless someone tips them off. A tense silence stretched between them. What do you want? Nick finally asked. I want you to understand something, Daniel said, voice dropping. I survived 3 tours in places where death came from clear skies. I've ended men who never saw me coming, and I was very, very good at my job. He slid a phone across the table. This has evidence of everything you and Volkov are planning. In 3 days, it automatically uploads to federal servers, unless I enter a code. Nick's face darkened. You think I won't find where you're hiding? That we won't shut you up permanently? Daniel smiled, the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. I'm counting on you to try. He stood up, tossed cash on the table. 3 days, Nick. Choose wisely. As Daniel walked away, Nick called after him. Your wife never loved you. She was always waiting for me to come back. Daniel didn't turn around. The trap was set. Ryan's expression was grim as Daniel explained his encounter with Nick. You basically painted a target on your back, he said. Volkov isn't someone to mess with. They sat in a secure apartment Ryan kept for clients who needed to disappear temporarily. The walls were soundproofed, the windows bulletproof, and a complex security system monitored all approaches. I'm counting on Nick to panic, Daniel replied. He'll go to Volkov, who'll want me eliminated before their operation concludes. And that helps you how? Exactly. Daniel unfolded a map of the city. Because while they're hunting me, I'll be preparing the real trap. Over the next 24 hours, Daniel's prediction played out with clockwork precision. Through Ryan's network of contacts, they learned that Volkov had indeed put out feelers, seeking information on Daniel's whereabouts. 2 men had been spotted watching Westview General Hospital, where Daniel worked. Meanwhile, Daniel called in favors from people he'd helped during his nursing career. A pharmacy technician who owed him for covering up a dispensing error provided certain medications. A former patient who'd beaten an opioid addiction after Daniel's intervention offered his skills as a locksmith. You never told me why they chose your house, Ryan commented as they assembled equipment. Seems like a huge risk for whatever they're planning. Daniel paused. It's the location. Our house backs up to the state forest. There's a service road half a mile through the woods that connects to the interstate. Perfect for moving something without being seen. What about Hannah? You think she's involved willingly? The question hung in the air. Despite everything, Daniel had been avoiding this particular line of thought. I don't know, he finally admitted, but I'm going to find out. That night, while Nick was meeting with Volkov, Daniel slipped back into his former home through a basement window he'd deliberately left with a faulty lock years ago. Another military habit. Always having a back door. The house felt different. Nick's possessions lay scattered throughout. His clothing hung in Daniel's closet. His toiletries cluttered the bathroom counter. Photos of Daniel had been removed, replaced with new ones of Hannah and Nick. In the guest bedroom, Daniel found what he was looking for. The crates. Using specialized tools, he opened one without breaking the seal. Inside were tightly wrapped packages he immediately recognized as high-grade heroin, millions of dollars worth. As he carefully reclosed the crate, he heard the front door open. Quickly, he moved to the bedroom closet, sliding behind hanging clothes. Hannah entered alone, dropping her purse on the bed with a weary sigh. She paced the room, then pulled out her phone and dialed. "Mom, it's me," she said, her voice strained. "No, he still hasn't contacted anyone. I know it's been a week. Of course I feel terrible." She paused, listening. "You don't understand. Nick said it was just temporary, that we needed a secure location for some merchandise. No, I didn't know what it was at first. By the time I realized, I was already in too deep." Another pause. "I can't go to the police. Nick made it clear what would happen." Her voice broke. "I never wanted to hurt Daniel. He deserved better than this." After she hung up, Hannah sank onto the bed, buried her face in her hands, and wept. Daniel remained motionless in the closet, listening to his wife's unfiltered grief, reconciling it with the woman who had laughed as his possessions were thrown onto the lawn. When she finally left the room, Daniel slipped out the way he had come, carrying with him a small sample from one of the packages and something else, a single strand of Hannah's hair from her brush. "You got what you needed?" Ryan asked when he returned. "More than I expected," Daniel replied, his expression unreadable. Nick Fletcher had never been a patient man. The waiting was killing him, cooped up in Daniel's house with Hannah's increasingly nervous presence. 3 days, the ex-husband had said. It had been 2, and despite Volkov's men searching everywhere, Daniel Harrington had vanished like smoke. "He's bluffing," Nick told himself as he paced the living room. "There's no evidence, no phone, nothing to upload." But doubt gnawed at him. He'd underestimated Daniel from the beginning, dismissing him as a soft civilian. The cold, calculating look in the man's eyes at the diner told a different story. This wasn't just some heartbroken husband. This was a trained operator who'd gone ghost at the first sign of trouble. Hannah entered the living room, arms wrapped protectively around herself. "Nick, we need to talk about what happens after everything's done." "Not now," he snapped. "I've got bigger problems." "Like my husband?" she asked quietly. Nick rounded on her. "Your husband is nothing. A nobody who got lucky in the military and came back to play nurse. Then why are you so scared of him?" The slap was reflexive, hard enough to knock Hannah back a step. She touched her reddening cheek, wide-eyed with shock. "I'm not scared," Nick hissed. "I'm cautious. There's a difference." His phone rang. Volkov. Nick stepped outside to take the call, leaving Hannah staring after him, something hardening in her expression. Meanwhile, Daniel and Ryan were executing the next phase of their plan. They'd identified Volkov's 2 main lieutenants, Leon Reeves, a former intelligence contractor with a taste for expensive whiskey, and Makar Pavlov, Volkov's nephew and heir apparent. "Divide and conquer," Daniel explained as they watched Leon enter his favorite bar. "The organization fractures when the leadership can't trust each other." Inside, Ryan took a seat next to Leon at the bar, ordered the same whiskey, and struck up a conversation about rare spirits. 20 minutes later, when Leon excused himself to use the restroom, Ryan slipped something into his drink. The next morning, Leon woke in a motel room with no memory of how he'd gotten there, only a burner phone on the nightstand with a single text. "Insurance files sent to Volkov. Need to meet. Your office. Noon." Simultaneously, Makar received an anonymous package containing surveillance photos of Leon meeting with a known FBI informant, along with bank statements showing large deposits to an offshore account. By noon, Volkov's organization was in chaos. Leon and Makar were accusing each other of betrayal, while Volkov struggled to maintain order. The weapons shipment, supposed to accompany the drugs in 3 days, was postponed indefinitely. "They're scrambling," Ryan reported after speaking with his contacts. "Volkov's pulled men off the search for you to deal with the internal threat." Daniel nodded. "Perfect. Now we need the final piece. He pulled out a burner phone and made a call to a number he'd memorized years ago. Major Miles, it's Harrington. I need to call in that favor you owe me. The next day, Special Agent Paula Wheeler of the DEA received an anonymous tip about a major drug shipment, complete with detailed information about the location, quantity, and players involved. What interested her most was the tipster's claim that a rogue soldier was planning to intercept the shipment for himself. "We have a potential bloodbath brewing," she told her team. "We move tomorrow night." As evening fell, Daniel prepared the last elements of his plan. In a secure location, he laid out several syringes filled with a carefully measured compound. "What exactly is that?" Ryan asked, eyeing the syringes warily. "A cocktail," Daniel replied. "Scopolamine, ketamine, and a few other things. Untraceable on standard tox screens. Breaks down quickly in the body." "Jesus, Dan. Are you sure about this?" Daniel's eyes were cold as he packed the syringes in a specialized case. "Nick made his choice when he moved into my house. Hannah made hers when she put my things on the lawn." "And what about your choice?" Ryan pressed. "This crosses a line." "I crossed that line years ago," Daniel replied quietly, "in places you've never been. The difference is, this time I'm choosing who deserves it." On the morning of the third day, Daniel sat alone in Ryan's secure apartment, methodically cleaning a set of surgical tools. He'd always had steady hands, what made him an excellent medic in the field, and later a sought-after trauma nurse. Those same hands now prepared instruments not for healing, but for something else entirely. His phone buzzed with a text from Ryan. "Package delivered." The package was a carefully crafted piece of misinformation delivered anonymously to Volkov, suggesting that Daniel planned to steal the drug shipment that night. It was the final push designed to force their hand. Across town, Nick paced nervously in Daniel's former home office, which he'd converted into a makeshift command center. Maps of the area were spread across the desk, along with 3 burner phones and a handgun. "Volkov wants us to move the shipment tonight," he told Hannah, who stood in the doorway, arms folded. "All of it. His contact at the DEA says there might be a raid coming tonight." Hannah's face paled. "But you said we had 3 days. Plans change." Nick checked his watch. "The trucks arrive at midnight. We load everything, and it's gone by 1 a.m., then we're in the clear." "And Daniel?" she asked quietly. Nick's expression darkened. "Volkov's men found a lead on where he's hiding. They're handling it. Will they kill him? Does it matter? He's nothing to you now." Nick grabbed her arm. "You're with me, remember? We're building something here." She pulled away. "Building what, exactly?" "A life running drugs for Volkov. Is that what you promised when you came back?" Nick laughed harshly. "Don't get self-righteous now. You knew what this was when you let me move in. I knew you needed a place to store some merchandise. I didn't know it was millions in heroin. I didn't know Daniel would be in danger." Nick sneered. "Your husband's a big boy. He made his choice when he threatened me." Outside the house, concealed by the growing dusk, Daniel listened to the argument through a directional microphone. His suspicions about Hannah's involvement were confirmed in real time. Not entirely innocent, but not fully complicit either. Manipulated, certainly. Used, definitely. Not that it changed anything. As darkness fell completely, Daniel moved. While Nick was occupied with preparations in the basement, Daniel re-entered the house through his secret access point. He made his way silently to the kitchen, where he carefully injected a clear liquid into an open bottle of bourbon Nick had left on the counter. The man's habit of drinking from the bottle, now a fatal vulnerability. Then, just as silently, Daniel retreated to the woods behind the property. There, he prepared a blind, a concealed observation post with a clear view of the house and the service road beyond. From a specialized container, he removed a high-powered rifle with a thermal scope, assembled it with practiced hands, and settled in to wait. At 10:30 p.m., 2 SUVs pulled up to the house. 6 men emerged, Volkov's security team, there to oversee the transfer. They entered the house, where Nick greeted them tensely. Through Daniel's scope, he could see Hannah being instructed to stay upstairs. At 11:15 p.m., Nick, clearly agitated, took a long pull directly from the bourbon bottle. By 11:30, he began showing signs of disorientation, touching his head, leaning against furniture for support. At 11:45, Nick staggered upstairs, waving off concern from Volkov's men, claiming he needed to lie down for a few minutes. Daniel watched through his scope as Nick entered the master bedroom, where Hannah appeared startled by his condition. Words were exchanged, heated ones, judging by their body language. Then Nick collapsed onto the bed, his movements uncoordinated, while Hannah backed away toward the door. Perfect timing. Daniel reached for his phone and sent a pre-composed text to Agent Wheeler. Operation in progress. Harrington House. Shipment moving tonight. Then he sent a second text to Ryan. Phase 1 complete. Commence Phase 2. Across town, Ryan made a call to a number he'd been given. The voice that answered was gruff, professional. Major Miles. Sir, this is Maxwell. Harrington says it's time. There was a pause. Understood. Assets are in position. As midnight approached, 3 unmarked vans turned onto the road leading to Daniel's house, their lights off, moving with precision. Simultaneously, DEA vehicles took up positions at strategic points near the property. Agents prepared for a raid but held position on Wheeler's command. Inside the house, oblivious to the encirclement, Volkov's men continued preparations for the shipment transfer. In the master bedroom, Nick lay immobile, barely conscious, with Hannah watching him from the doorway, fear and indecision oaring on her face. And in his blind in the woods, Daniel Harrington waited for the perfect moment to spring the trap that would destroy everything Nick and Volkov had built, and change Daniel's own life forever. At precisely midnight, 3 delivery trucks pulled onto the service road behind Daniel's house. Through his scope, Daniel watched as Volkov's men moved with practiced efficiency, establishing a security perimeter before signaling the trucks to approach. In the master bedroom, Nick lay motionless on the bed, his breathing shallow, eyes unfocused. The compound Daniel had created was working exactly as designed. Paralyzing, but not lethal. At least not yet. Hannah paced the room, repeatedly checking her phone, torn between fear and in self-preservation. Daniel pressed the transmit button on his radio. Bravo team, status. In position, came Major Miles's clipped response. 12 men with NVGs, awaiting your signal. Hold for Phase 2, Daniel replied. Below, Volkov's men had begun moving the crates from the house to the first truck. The operation was smooth, professional. These weren't street-level dealers. They were experienced smugglers who had done this many times before. Daniel adjusted his position slightly and focused on the lead truck. Through his scope, he could make out the driver, Makar Pavlov, Volkov's nephew. The fact that he was personally overseeing the transport spoke volumes about the shipment's importance. Perfect. Daniel picked up his phone and made a call to Agent Wheeler. The shipment is moving now, he said when she answered. 3 trucks heading east on the service road toward the interstate. Armed escort, at least 6 men. Who is this? How did you? The information I provided was accurate. Daniel cut her off. Now I'm giving you the window to make your move. 5 minutes, then they're gone. He ended the call and immediately radioed Major Miles. Execute Phase 2. Countdown starts now. What happened next was a precisely orchestrated symphony of chaos. First, 2 small explosive charges detonated on the service road, far enough from the house to avoid injury, but close enough to block the truck's escape route. Next, Major Miles's team, all former Special Forces operators, emerged from the woods on the opposite side, creating the impression of a pincer movement. They fired over the heads of Volkov's men, driving them back toward the house. Simultaneously, DEA agents responded to what they believed was an imminent escape, accelerating their raid timeline. They approached from the front of the house, announcing their presence with sirens and floodlights. Caught between what they perceived as two separate forces, Volkov's men made the predictable choice. They retreated into the house with the drugs, prepared to defend their shipment. Inside, Hannah heard the commotion and rushed to the window, panic evident on her face as she saw the lights and heard the shouting. She grabbed her phone, dialing frantically. Daniel watched it all unfold through his scope, timing his next move carefully. When the last of Volkov's men had retreated into the house, he pressed his radio again. Phase 3. I'm moving in. Using the confusion as cover, Daniel approached the house from a blind spot he'd identified earlier, a section of the property not visible from either the front approach or the service road. He entered through the same basement access point he used before, moving silently up the stairs into the main house. The interior was chaos. Volkov's men had taken defensive positions, some facing the front where DEA agents were shouting commands to surrender, others watching the back where they believed another threat existed. None of them noticed Daniel as he slipped into the hallway leading to the bedrooms. He found Hannah in the master bedroom, still on her phone, her back to the door. Nick remained on the bed, conscious but immobile, eyes widening in recognition and fear as Daniel entered. They're surrounding the house, Hannah was saying into her phone, her voice strained. Nick is sick, or drugged, or something. I don't know what to. She turned and froze, the phone slipping from her fingers as she saw Daniel. Hello, Hannah, he said calmly. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly. From below came the sound of breaking glass and shouted commands as the DEA began their entry. Not much time, Daniel continued, stepping farther into the room. He glanced at Nick, whose eyes blazed with helpless rage. I see you've been taking care of my replacement. Dan, Hannah finally managed. What did you do? I created a scenario, he replied, as if discussing the weather. Volkov believes his operation was betrayed from within. The DEA believes they're stopping a major drug shipment. And you too. He looked between Hannah and the paralyzed Nick. You're caught in the middle. You set us up, she whispered. No different than what you did to me, Daniel said coldly, though I was more efficient about it. Shouts and the sound of a struggle echoed from downstairs. They didn't have much time. The DEA will be here any moment, Daniel said. They'll find Volkov's drugs, Nick's fingerprints all over everything. And you, Hannah, the homeowner who let it all happen. I didn't know, she protested, tears forming. I swear I didn't know what he was really doing until it was too late. Maybe, Daniel acknowledged. But that's between you and the federal prosecutors now. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a syringe. What is that? Hannah asked, backing away. Insurance, Daniel replied. The compound already in Nick's system will be undetectable in an autopsy. This, he held up the syringe, will cause his system to shut down completely. By the time they find him, it'll look like a heart attack brought on by stress. You're going to end him. Hannah's voice rose in panic. Daniel, you can't. Can't I? His voice was deadly quiet. He took my home, my wife, my life. And for what? To use as a way station for his drug operation. To feel like he'd won some game I didn't even know we were playing. Nick made a strangled sound, trying desperately to move, to speak, but the paralytic held him firmly. Footsteps pounded on the stairs. The DEA was working their way through the house, room by room. Daniel looked at Hannah, really looked at her, searching for the woman he'd married. All he saw was fear and self-interest. Make your choice, Hannah, he said, holding out the syringe. You can inject him yourself and tell the DEA you found him like this when they broke in. Or you can let him live, and when he recovers, he'll tell them everything about your involvement. She stared at the syringe, conflict etched on her face. Why are you doing this to me? She whispered. I'm not doing anything, Daniel replied coldly. I'm giving you the choice I never had. 3 days later, Nick Fletcher was found dead in the guest bedroom, of what had once been Daniel and Hannah Harrington's home. The official cause: cardiac arrest, likely brought on by the stress of the DEA raid and his subsequent arrest. Despite the best efforts of prison medical staff, he couldn't be resuscitated. That same day, in an interview room at the federal building downtown, Hannah Harrington sat across from Agent Wheeler, her eyes red-rimmed from sleepless nights in custody. "Let me understand this," Wheeler said, reviewing her notes. "You claim you had no knowledge that the crates contained heroin, that you believed they were legitimate merchandise for Mr. Fletcher's business." "Yes," Hannah insisted. "Nick told me they were specialized exercise equipment, prototypes. That's why they needed to be stored somewhere secure, and you never looked inside these crates. Never questioned why they required armed guards to transport." Hannah's gaze dropped to the table. "I started to suspect something was wrong, but by then, I was afraid of what Nick might do if I asked too many questions." Wheeler's expression remained skeptical. "The DEA's office is prepared to charge you as an accessory. The penalties for trafficking this quantity of heroin are severe, Mrs. Harrington." "I've told you everything I know," Hannah said desperately. "What else can I do?" "Cooperation might help your case," Wheeler allowed. "But we need more than just Nick Fletcher. We need Volkov." Hannah's phone had started ringing incessantly moments after news of Nick's death broke. 87 missed calls from a blocked number before the DEA had taken her phone as evidence. She knew who it was, knew what he wanted. "If I help you with Volkov," she said carefully, "what kind of deal could I get?" Meanwhile, across town, Daniel sat in a different interview room with 2 military investigators from the Criminal Investigation Division. His hands were folded calmly on the table as they reviewed their file. "Major Miles confirms your account," the lead investigator said. "He states that you contacted him with information about a drug operation being run by a Russian national named Ivan Volkov." "That's correct," Daniel replied. "And you learned about this operation how?" "Through my wife," Daniel explained. "When I found my clothes in garbage bags on the lawn after working a double shift, my wife texted, 'We needed your closet for my ex-boyfriend's things.' When I asked how long he was staying, they both laughed. Permanently, of course." He paused. "I left quietly. 3 days later, I learned that Nick, the ex-boyfriend, was using my house to store drugs for Volkov. I reported what I knew to Major Miles, who agreed to assist." The second investigator leaned forward. "The problem, Mr. Harrington, is the timing. You reported this after you had already confronted Nick Fletcher at a diner, threatening to expose his operation." Daniel's expression remained impassive. "I needed confirmation before involving the military. The confrontation was a calculated risk to gather more information. And your wife's involvement. I believe she was manipulated," Daniel said carefully. "Whether she was fully aware of what was happening in our house is for the courts to decide." The investigators exchanged glances. "Mr. Harrington, were you present at the house during the DEA raid?" A moment of silence stretched. "No," Daniel replied evenly. "I was at Ryan Maxwell's apartment. He can confirm my whereabouts." The lead investigator closed his file. "For now, we're concluding our investigation into your involvement. The DEA has primary jurisdiction over the drug trafficking case." As Daniel was escorted out, he passed the room where Hannah was still being interviewed. Their eyes met briefly through the glass, hers pleading, his unreadable. That evening, in Ryan's apartment, Daniel watched a local news report on Nick Fletcher's death in custody. "Heart failure," Ryan commented, taking the swig of beer. "Convenient." Daniel said nothing, his attention fixed on the screen as it showed footage of Ivan Volkov being led away in handcuffs, the result of Hannah's cooperation. "You never told me what really happened in that bedroom," Ryan said carefully, "with Hannah and Nick." Daniel turned from the television. "Does it matter?" "I guess not," Ryan conceded. "But Hannah's calls, 87 of them before the feds took her phone. She's trying to reach you." "Let her try," Daniel replied coldly. "She might take a deal," Ryan continued. "Testify against Volkov for reduced charges. She could be out in a few years. Daniel stood, moved to the window. The city lights spread before him like a field of stars, each one representing lives entangled in their own dramas of love, betrayal, and consequences. "It doesn't change anything," he said finally. "What was broken can't be repaired." His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mr. Harrington, this is Agent Wheeler. We need to speak tomorrow." 9 a.m. Ryan read the message over his shoulder. "What do you think she wants?" Daniel pocketed the phone. Closure. Something few of us ever really get. 1 year later, the small cabin in the Northwood wilderness was exactly what Daniel had been looking for. Remote, self-sufficient, with a view of mountains that reminded him of Black Rock, though without the constant threat of violence. Here, the silence was broken only by wind through pines and the occasional cry of an eagle. He sat on the porch, coffee mug in hand, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold. A year since the Volkov case had wrapped up. A year since he'd walked away from his old life entirely. Volkov had received 30 years in federal prison after Hannah's testimony helped dismantle his entire operation. Hannah herself had been sentenced to 5 years, eligible for parole in 3. A generous deal, considering the evidence against her. Daniel had never visited her, had never responded to her letters, which arrived with steadfast regularity despite his silence. They sat in a box in his cabin, unopened but not discarded, a testament to something he couldn't quite name. The crunch of tires on gravel announced a visitor, unusual for a place so deliberately isolated. Daniel set down his coffee and watched as a government SUV wound its way up the dirt road. Agent Wheeler. He'd been expecting her, though not this soon. She stepped out of the vehicle, looking out of place in her crisp suit against the rugged landscape. "Beautiful spot," she commented as she approached the porch. "Though a long way from civilization." "That's the point," Daniel replied, gesturing to a second chair. "Coffee?" She nodded, taking the seat while Daniel went inside to pour her a cup. When he returned, she was surveying the valley below. "I could get used to this view," she admitted, accepting the coffee. "But you won't," Daniel said. "You're here on business." Wheeler sipped her coffee, considering him over the rim. Volkov's organization has been dismantled, his assets seized, his associates prosecuted. A complete success by any measure. "And yet you're here," Daniel observed. She set down her mug. "Nick Fletcher's autopsy has been reviewed. The initial finding of natural causes has been questioned." Daniel's expression remained calm. "By whom?" "By me," Wheeler replied. "There were inconsistencies, subtle ones, nothing that would stand up in court, but enough to make me curious about what really happened in that bedroom during the raid. About whether Hannah Harrington is serving time for more than just drug trafficking." Daniel held her gaze. "Are you here to arrest me, Agent Wheeler?" "No," she said after a moment. "I'm here to close a file, to satisfy my own curiosity. And if you don't like the answers." Wheeler looked out at the mountains again. "Sometimes justice and the law don't perfectly align. Nick Fletcher was a violent criminal who destroyed lives for profit. If his death wasn't entirely natural," she shrugged. "I can live with the ambiguity." Daniel studied her, recognizing in her pragmatism something that echoed his own military experience, the understanding that the world rarely offered clean moral choices. "The official record stands," he said finally. "Anything else is speculation." Wheeler nodded slowly. "Fair enough." She reached into her jacket and withdrew an envelope. "Your ex-wife is being released next month. Good behavior, cooperation, the usual factors. She asked me to give you this." Daniel made no move to take the envelope. "She's dying," Wheeler added quietly. "Cancer. Advanced stage." The Bureau arranged compassionate release. The news landed like a physical blow, unexpected in its impact. Daniel had imagined many futures, many possible endings to their story, but not this. Reluctantly, he took the envelope. "Thank you for the coffee," Wheeler said, standing. "And for your service, both military and otherwise. After she'd gone, Daniel sat for a long time with the unopened envelope, turning it over in his hands as the sun climbed higher in the sky. Finally, he tore it open. Inside was a single photograph. Hannah and Daniel on their wedding day, laughing, unaware of the camera. On the back, in Hannah's handwriting, "I made my choice that night. I chose wrong. I'm sorry." No plea for forgiveness. No request to visit. Just an acknowledgement of the truth that they both knew. Daniel returned to the cabin and placed the photograph in the box with the unopened letters. Then he packed a small bag with essential supplies and locked the cabin door behind him. The mountains called, as they always did when his mind needed clearing. He would hike to the ridge, make camp, and watch the stars appear one by one in a sky untainted by city lights. In that vastness, he would contemplate what remained after revenge had burned itself out. Not forgiveness, certainly, but perhaps something like peace. As he shouldered his pack and set off on the familiar trail, Daniel thought about choices. Those made in moments of crisis, those made in cold calculation, and those yet to come. He thought about Hannah, dying in a hospital somewhere, carrying the weight of her decisions to the end. He thought about Nick, whose arrogance had cost him everything. And he thought about himself, a man who had walked away from bloodshed only to create his own version of justice when the world demanded it. The path steepened. His breathing deepened. Behind him, the cabin grew smaller with distance. Ahead lay the wilderness, indifferent to human dramas, offering neither judgment nor absolution, only the next step forward, and the one after that. Daniel Harrington kept walking.